Winter's hitting hard right now over large areas of America. Even here in North Texas, there's a call for 3 to 6 inches of snow the day that this video is set to be released. We don't get snow here very often, so I hope we get at least a little bit of snow, enough so the girls can go out and build a snowman or something. But with all the cold weather, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about riding a motorcycle safely on snow and ice. So here's an example of a motorcycle somewhat safely riding on ice, and here's an example of what that tire looks like to allow this rider to ride on ice. So in my opinion, if you're not on a frozen surface that has no street traffic and you do not have tires that look similar to the ones you see here, you should really stay off the bike in slick and frozen conditions. So until next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you. Well, hold on. If I ended the video right there, I would have covered the topic, but you paid for this video with a click, and I want to give you your money's worth. There may be situations out on the road where you get caught in inclement weather on your motorcycle. What are you supposed to do in those situations? Well, I've got a story of one instance where I got caught in some really sketchy weather. We'll talk about that, and then I'll share some tips with you if you find yourself in a similar situation. So my story was several years ago in the winter, like it is now. Here in North Texas, you'll have days where it's, 50, 60 degrees in the wintertime. This particular class that I was teaching was on a Saturday and Sunday. Saturday was beautiful weather. Sunday morning was actually nice weather. It was about 55 degrees, the best I remember, when we met Sunday morning for the class. I knew that some cold weather was coming in and there was some possibility of some really rough weather. So we started a little bit earlier trying to beat the bad weather. Well, students required some extra attention, and around 1 p.m. we still weren't through with the class, but around probably 9 or 10 a.m. the wind picked up. And the temperature quickly dropped from that balmy temperature we were talking about earlier, and it was below freezing by the time we got to lunchtime. Not only was it cold, it continued dropping down into the 20s, so that's pretty cold with a strong wind going. The pavement at this time, though, was still in good condition, so I wasn't really concerned about what the class being able to continue until around 1 p.m. when a little light rain started in with the cold temperatures, and the students were getting cold. They were unable to concentrate, even though the rain mixed with a little bit of ice after a little bit was not sticking to the pavement. It was time to end that class and continue it on another day. So we got the students back to the Connex containers, let them go, and then I loaded all the motorcycles into the container and took about an hour, 45 minutes to get everything put away. And then I pulled my motorcycle out. First of all, I walked around and I checked. It was starting to come down a little bit harder at this time, the rain and the sleet, but it wasn't sticking to the pavement because the ground was so warm. So I walked around the parking lot just trying to find a slick spot, and I couldn't find anywhere that there was ice. At this time, the temperatures were well down into the 20s, and there was still a strong wind blowing, and I was about 6 or 7 miles from my house, so it wasn't a very long drive. I thought, I can bundle up, I can get to the house, it won't be an issue. Well, what I didn't count on when I got out on the road was the wet roads blowing all that rain and moisture up off of the road and it freezing to me and my motorcycle because of the cold temperatures. So I quickly found out my front windshield on the motorcycle was going to freeze up. So I couldn't see through the windshield anymore, so I lifted my head up a little bit to see over the windshield. Had the full face helmet on. Wasn't too long till my face shield froze up. So now I'm stuck with cracking that face shield a little bit so that I can see, but I was getting pelted with this mix of rain and sleet that was coming down and could barely keep my eyes open in order to see the road. The road conditions still weren't really bad, but it wasn't going to be very long till those roads froze over. Long story short, I got the motorcycle home. It was a little bit sketchy getting the motorcycle into the driveway because my driveway was frozen, so I had to stick my feet out like outriggers and let the motorcycle scoot up a little bit into the garage. But I went out about an hour later because I was very cold when I got home. Went out 45 minutes to an hour later and snapped a few pictures of my motorcycle. So here's the tank of the Honda Valkyrie I was on. That's not water beads that are on the bike. That's ice that's frozen to it. You can see the front windshield here, and you can see that there was clearly no way to see through that windshield because it was totally frozen over, and my face shield on the full face helmet looked exactly like that windshield. You can see the streets is starting to glaze a little bit. It was raining initially, and now it's starting to freeze out there. And in fact, the whole Metroplex was frozen down for a few days after this storm. We get any snow or ice here, it's usually ice, and that shuts things down for a while. But in this instance, I was fortunate to get the motorcycle home and to keep everything upright. So what did I learn from it? Well, I should have pulled the motorcycle into the storage container and called for a ride home, but I decided to tough it out and to ride anyway. I was fortunate that I didn't have to go much further than I did because conditions kept getting worse and the temperatures continued to drop. So if there's any way not to ride in conditions like this or snow or ice, I suggest not riding. However, if you do have to ride, here are some tips to get you to the place where you can get off the road and get your motorcycle put away until the weather clears up. First thing you want to do is use the car tracks in front of you. So this was important for me out on the highway. I often suggest, using lane position in order to increase your visibility to traffic around you, but more importantly, increase your visibility up the road. In situations like this, what becomes of premium importance is traction. And the place that you're going to find the most traction is directly in the car tracks of the vehicle in front of you. You want to increase your following distance, obviously, but you want to follow those car tracks because that's the place where you're going to find the driest pavement with the most amount of traction. You want to adjust your braking practices. In really poor traction conditions, ABS can hurt as much as it helps. So what do I mean by that? The Valkyrie I was riding on this day didn't have ABS on it, and that was probably to my advantage in these conditions that I was riding in, but it required some extra caution on my part. Think about how ABS works for a minute. If the motorcycle detects that the tire has lost traction with the road, it reduces or eliminates brake force until the tire regains traction. If the tire never has or never regains traction, a motorcycle with ABS will never apply brake pressure. You can squeeze that lever as hard as you want, but the motorcycle will not apply pressure from the brake pads to the caliper, and it will not slow you down. As a rider, we have to keep that in mind under conditions like this and slow down way before we would normally. So we have to increase the distance that we're using to stop the motorcycle and apply the brakes much smoother when doing so. Another tip when you're slowing down is to find the dry patches. You'll often see patches, like I said, is usually in the track of the vehicle in front of you, but you want to look for those dry patches. So sometimes you'll see pavement and then a little bit of snow or ice and then dry pavement again. When you're in those sections where there's dry pavement, you want to apply a little more pressure to the brakes in those situations and use that known dry pavement to scrub off as much speed as possible. Also, we can use engine braking to our advantage when we're in situations like this. But just like the brakes, you don't want to be aggressive with engine braking. So when you do downshift, it's best to slowly release the clutch back into the lower gear so that you don't overwhelm your traction with engine braking as well as your braking force. It's important where you focus your attention in situations like this. In urban settings, be particularly aware of businesses and homes that may have automatic sprinklers that cause huge ice patches in urban areas. Under ideal conditions, our goal is to look as far up the road as we can see and see the hazards well in advance, and that's not always possible in scenarios like this because the hazards that are the biggest threat to us are harder to see at a distance, so we have to rein in our visual attention to some degree so that we can see those ice and snow patches that are harder to detect at further distances. So we got to bring our primary focus in, and this in turn requires us to slow down considerably. Next, you want to minimize leaning in turns. This means you're going to have to take turns slower and wider if possible so that you don't have to lean the motorcycle over as far when you're negotiating a curve. By not leaning over, you reduce the amount of traction required for negotiating the turn. Now this one is huge, and I've said this before, but you want to stay loose on the motorcycle. So this is a tip I frequently give, but here it can be a real challenge. Not only are you usually very cold in situations like this, which causes you to tense up being cold, but you're on edge about losing traction, and this further increases the tension that we ride with. You know, I had a little self-talk going on the whole time I was riding home from that training class, and the recurring theme of that talk was to stay loose. Tight shoulders and arms, going down to the handlebars, and a death grip on the hand grips, and you're limiting your motorcycle's ability to stay upright. As humans, we're most tense when there is fear of the unknown. Riding in slippery conditions offers a whole lot of unknowns. Be aware that the tires may act a little differently than normal. They may slip a little, but our best plan of action is to stay loose. Stay extremely smooth with the brakes and the throttle, and don't panic. You know, these tips alone can help get you to a safe place to stop and get you off the road until the weather conditions clear up. Till next week, this is Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. There's a whole lot more to MCrider than just the weekly videos. Go to MCrider.com/member. You'll get instant access to the forums and the field guide. You get ad-free MCrider videos and a whole lot more. Go to MCrider.com/member for all the details.